She may not have Chrom, but she'll always be number 1 in our hearts. Cordelia is the second Pegasus Knight that we get in the game after Sumia, and it's pretty hard to avoid comparing the two of them, so I'll start off by doing that. Now, compared to Cordelia, Sumia has far higher skill, speed, and luck. Now, Cordelia's growths and caps in those areas are still good, but here's the thing. By the time Sumia reaches level 7, she should have far higher skill, speed, and luck than Cordelia's base stats. And eventually, they're going to go very, very high. Sumia is going to max out those 3 stats long before Cordelia does. And in most of my playthroughs, because I usually use both of them, in most of my playthroughs, generally speaking, Sumia usually is about 10 points ahead of Cordelia in all those stats, and that's very significant. So Sumia still has a pretty major niche. Don't think that Cordelia completely outclasses her, because that is not true, unlike what would be the case in earlier Fire Emblems. If caps were as low as they were in earlier games, I would completely recommend Cordelia over Sumia in every way, but with the way they are in Awakening, thankfully both of them remain useful, and both of them have very different roles. Cordelia's main strength, though, over Sumia is, well, no pun intended, her strength stat. A 60% strength growth is insane by Pegasus Knight standards. Like, seriously, other Pegasus Knights would kill for a growth like that. And with a +1 cap, that's also really good considering that the other Pegasus Knight we've got has a negative cap there. So, if you want a Pegasus Knight who hits really hard, Cordelia is the one you want to go to. And that's something that not many Pegasus Knights in the entire series can claim to be able to do, so Cordelia is actually very, very good just for that. Her base growth in strength is pretty high too, so she'll have great strength no matter what class she's in. Of course, that comes at the cost of her base skill and speed growths being a little low by Pegasus Knight standards, but I mean, they're still decent. As a Pegasus Knight, she still has 60% growth in both of them, which is good, but again, not as good as Sumia. Her luck, though, 45% is not bad, but there is a -1 cap in that area, so she is a little unlucky sometimes, though again, it's more like her luck is average rather than bad. Now, despite not having a positive modifier to defense, a 45% growth combined with a very good base in defense by Pegasus Knight standards means that Cordelia is surprisingly tanky for a Pegasus Knight. Again, that is for a Pegasus Knight. I mean, other people will definitely out-tank her, but as far as Pegasus Knights go, if you want one who doesn't go splat when hit by, let's say, axes, Cordelia is, again, the one you want to go to. Her HP growth is actually not bad either for Pegasus Knight standards. I mean, it's as good as Gaius, and his HP was considered very good by Thief standards, so hers is quite decent too. Though speaking of Pegasus Knight standards, one thing to note about Cordelia though, her resistance is a little low by those standards. With a -1 cap, only a 35% growth, and a resistance base that's the same as her defense base rather than higher. Most level 7 Pegasus Knights would have much higher resistance, so Cordelia, as far as Pegasus Knights go, actually is not nearly as good of a magical tank as they tend to be, so she's a lot better at tanking physical hits than magical hits. Again, that's a massive rarity for Pegasus Knights, so Cordelia's quite interesting. If anything, her actual stat build is more fitting of a mercenary than a Pegasus Knight, so kind of think of her as a flying mercenary who uses lances. So that's pretty much it, though one thing that I will point out, one other thing that Sumia has over Cordelia is magic. Now, normally this wouldn't be important, but since Falcon Knights can use lances and Dark Flyers can use tomes, Sumia is definitely better as far as magic using goes in both of those two classes than Cordelia is. Of course, Cordelia is better at hitting harder physically, but with a -1 magic cap and a very low magic growth, Cordelia is definitely not that good as far as using magic goes. And that's interesting because, well, let's check out our class options. Now, Cordelia actually has something very interesting going on with her class options, and something that I didn't realise until I did some more research on it. In fitting with her status as basically a jack-of-all-trades who's very talented at pretty much everything, Cordelia is the only character besides the Avatar in the first generation who, through their class options, is capable of wielding every weapon type in the game. Don't believe me? Well, she has lances as a Pegasus Knight, swords as a mercenary,
axes as a hero, bows as a bow knight, staves as a falcon knight, magic as a dark flyer, and dark magic as a dark mage. So, yeah, pretty much Cordelia has access to every single weapon type in the game. That doesn't mean that she's good with all of them, though. One thing that I will point out too, another one who can claim this is actually Ricken, but Ricken can't use dark magic, so as much as I wish he could, because he'd be really good at dark mage. Anyway. So, yeah, that's one thing about Cordelia. But as for her class options itself, I've more talked about how she is as a Pegasus Knight and her stats. She is much more strength-based and acts more like a flying mercenary than an actual, well, normal Pegasus Knight who's more like a speedy mage killer. The skills that Pegasus Knight gives, well, it's mainly the promoted skills that are important here. Cordelia is nowhere near as good of a rally user as Sumia is, but those rally skills can be alright, I guess. Lancefare is good though, especially since, well, yeah, it helps for the Pegasus Knight class, giving her +5 strength on lances, making her hit even harder. But of course, the main draw of this class is Gale Force. I mean, it's really the main thing that you want from Pegasus Knight, so she gets Gale Force, and that's always amazing. I don't really need to explain that anymore. Cordelia's first reclassing option is Mercenary, and yeah, kind of interesting. I was saying that her class options were more... Not her class options, but her stats were more fitting of a Mercenary than a Pegasus Knight, and hey, she gets that option. Now, Cordelia is very, very good in this class. Her growth rates are frankly perfect for a Mercenary/hero. And she learns some very good skills here too. Her caps are also great for a Mercenary, so Cordelia actually does this class very, very well. Probably just as good as the main character who joined as a Mercenary, so if you want a pretty good Mercenary, she's actually quite a good option for it. Now, she's not quite as good with Arms Thrift as many other characters, but like I said before, her luck is merely average rather than actually terrible, and Arms Thrift is always amazing, so it's not a bad option for her regardless. Patience is actually an alright skill, mainly because it works on the enemy phase, which is when Gale Force doesn't work, so at least it gives her some insurance there. Of course, though, again, the best skills come from the promotion options. As a hero, like I said, Cordelia has pretty much the perfect stat build for one, having a very good defense growth there as well as strength, skill, and speed, so... Again, she fits the class very well. She'll also gain Soul, which helps with her durability, being able to heal after attacks. And Axe Breaker, which will really be helpful if you decide to reclass her back into Pegasus Knight, because Pegasus Knights tend to not like axes very much, so extra evasion against them is great. And speaking of breaker skills that really help as a Pegasus Knight, as a Bow Knight, Cordelia will have access to Bow Breaker, which is a fantastic skill to use as a Pegasus Knight. Cordelia has access to a lot of breaker skills overall, really, but Bow Breaker is a particularly excellent one. Again, because an extra 50% evasion against arrows, the Pegasus Knight class's main weakness, is just fantastic. As far as Bow Knight goes, I guess Cordelia's pretty decent in that class too, so she actually makes a fairly good bow user there too, so she can do pretty much all physical classes well. Unfortunately, notice how I said physical classes there. Cordelia's last reclass tree is Dark Mage. And honestly, I never really saw the point of her having this class set. I mean, this really doesn't make much sense. Again, when I realized that it's because Cordelia should be able to use every type of weapon fitting her character, I do think it sort of makes sense. But before I found that out, I originally just thought that the only reason Cordelia was given this class branch was for fan service. Cordelia is, let me just not mince words here, Cordelia is very, very bad as a Dark Mage. Very bad. She'll only have a 35% magic growth as a sorcerer, and she'll have a 50% strength growth, so that's really not good. And she has a bad resistance modifier and bad resistance growth. She'll have good defense, but that's really all she'll have going for her. Yeah, save being a Dark Mage to, well, people like Miriel or the characters who start off as Dark Mages. It's really not a good class branch for her. As a Dark Knight, though, she'll have good stats as far as the physical spectrum goes. She'll be able to hit hard with swords there, but her magic will still be bad, so really, I'd much rather go for Bow Knight if I wanted her to be a horseback sword user. The skills from these classes, though, can be useful, I will admit. From Dark Mage, she gains access to Hex and Anathema, which she's one of the few non-magic users who actually learns these skills, and they can be kind of useful, basically increasing her critical hit ratio by lowering the enemy's critical negation. And overall, that can be quite helpful. Now, as a sorcerer, she'll learn Vengeance. Now, the thing with Vengeance is, maybe you might want to equip this and Soul at the same time. While it seems like a good idea, because Vengeance increases your damage based on how much HP you've lost, and Soul helps you recover that lost HP, right? Here's a problem. Vengeance, well, the thing is, Soul will activate before Vengeance triggers, so basically the activation, in terms of the skill activation hierarchy, only one of them can activate at a time, and that's already kind of not good, because if you activate Soul, you kind of miss out on your chance to get good damage with Vengeance, but if you activate Vengeance, then you really want to recover the HP, and you won't be able to do that turn because of Soul not being able to activate, so it's kind of a bit annoying. If the two could activate at the same time, it would be fantastic, but sadly they can't. The other thing to note is, despite being the lowest on the skill hierarchy as far as the activation rate priority goes, Vengeance has an enormously high activation chance. It's double your skill stat, which, as far as Cordelia is concerned, is basically 100% of the time, so it pretty much does guarantee you'll activate Vengeance if you don't activate Soul, but here's the thing, when you do activate Vengeance, you kind of want Soul as well to recover the lost HP. It's kind of annoying. I mean, it's decent, but the fact that it can't activate together with Soul is a little annoying. Now, a skill that does work well in combination with Vengeance is Life Taker, because those two skills can work in the same turn. Vengeance will get you the good damage, and Life Taker, if you defeat the enemy, will make you recover 50% of your max HP, which... So basically, you take the hit, lose HP, get Vengeance to activate, and recover the HP back with Life Taker. That's from the Dark Mage tree. I mean, the Dark Knight tree. But the problem with that, though, is that Cordelia isn't exactly one for taking much damage to begin with. In every class but Pegasus Knight, she actually has excellent durability. And even as a Pegasus Knight, her durability is very good for that class, so... Again, not exactly the best character to be using the Vengeance Life Taker combo with. You usually want lower defense when you're going for that. Now, speaking of Life Taker, though, Cordelia is actually one of the very few characters who has access to both Soul and Life Taker, meaning that she'll, if it works, I mean, if Soul works, she'll be able to recover twice in one round, basically, and be pretty much guaranteed to heal back all of her HP. It's a very good skill combination, especially on one with such great offense, which means more damage and thus more healing with Soul, and great defense as she does. So this is actually quite a good combo because it definitely aids in making her more tankish, so definitely consider that. Oh, by the way, don't mind the fact that I've used an image of Muriel as a Dark Knight for this. Yeah, I kind of couldn't find an image of Cordelia as a Dark Knight, so I had to use Muriel. It's definitely more noticeable. By the way, I don't think you've noticed this, but in one of my earlier stat sheets, I had to do the same thing. I couldn't find an image of someone in one class, so I had to use an image of another character. You probably haven't noticed it yet. Look back, though, and see if you can find it. I'll give you a hint. It was a male character. So anyway, that's pretty much Cordelia in a nutshell. She can use every weapon type, and she's good with most physical weapon types, just not good with magic. As a Falcon Knight, she won't heal that much, and as a Dark Flyer, she won't do very much damage with magic. So overall, try and stay away from her magic-using classes. Really, all they're good for is if she marries a primarily magic-using father. It can possibly make her child decent in those classes, but as far as she herself goes, really don't keep her in Dark Mage after you've learnt all those skills. It's definitely not a good class branch for her. Now, voice acting time. Cordelia is voiced by Julianne Taylor, who actually has done quite a lot of roles in video games.
She plays Tsubaki Yayoi in Blaze Blue, who also happens to be a red-haired character who has an unrequited crush on someone. Walking Guide, dang it, I mean Ai Ebihara in Persona 4. Yeah, That's Social Link, man. That's Social Link. And Carol in Tales of Vesperia. I'm never going to be able to look at Cordelia the same way again. Now, normally I would end this video here, but there's one more thing that I want to talk about with regards to Cordelia, and that is, of course, well, we had to cover this sometime. What's the deal with her and Chrom? As you will eventually find out in some of Cordelia's event tile and level up quotes, Cordelia is in love with Chrom. However, she is not one of his marriage options. In fact, they don't even get a support, so it's literally impossible. Don't even try. You cannot pair these two at all, under any circumstances. Now, you might be wondering why is that even the case? If she can't marry him, what's the point of making her have a major part of her character being in love with him? Well, Cordelia is pretty much a direct reference to Catria from Marth's games. Catria was a member of the Pegasus Knight trio in those games, and a big part of her character was that she had an unrequited crush on Marth. And, well, considering that Marth always ended up with Sheeta and there was no support system back then, it was impossible to pair her with him. That is basically what they were trying to invoke with Cordelia. Cordelia is pretty much the Catria archetype taken to its logical conclusion. They're literally repeating the same unrequited love character thing with her, basically. Now, Cordelia does actually get a conversation with Chrom in the Summer Scramble DLC episode. However, it's only possible if Cordelia is not married when you play that episode. So, if Cordelia has an S support with someone, then she cannot initiate this conversation with Chrom. Now, even if you're getting hopeful, it doesn't go anywhere. In fact, it's pretty much the exact opposite. The conversation, slight spoilers, pretty much end with Cordelia pretty much getting over Chrom completely. So, yeah, interesting they went to the detail to give them that conversation, but I doubt a lot of players will see it, since most people won't do that DLC until pretty much everyone's married. I might attempt to show that conversation at some point, because this new file is one of the few chances I have to do it. Again, Cordelia has to be unmarried for that conversation to occur. Chrom can be married though, but Cordelia can't be. Oh, and by the way, this image was pieced together from Cordelia and Chrom's confession scenes. It's not possible to see it in the game. But just one quick misconception I want to clear up with Cordelia. Some people, mostly Sumia haters, seem to be under the impression that because Cordelia and Sumia are friends, and Cordelia happens to be in love with Chrom and Sumia is very obviously in love with Chrom and probably his most likely canon wife, some people are under the impression that Sumia hates Cordelia's guts and there's secretly a bitter, violent love triangle going on between them. This is not true in the slightest. In fact, in Cordelia's support with Sumia, yes, they have supports, Chrom is never mentioned at all. Yep, their conversations make absolutely zero mention of Chrom, which I personally think is actually pretty nice. I like the fact that the writers actually did that. It pretty much just hammers home that there's more to Cordelia than just, oh, boo-hoo, why won't Chrom love me, than most people seem to think. Yeah, the fanbase seems to have kind of reduced Cordelia to a single issue like that. There's actually one more thing that I want to discuss about Cordelia, though, and that's an early artwork of her. And in this artwork, Cordelia has blue hair. This is very, very interesting, and it's led to a lot of speculation. There are some people who think that Cordelia was originally planned to be Chrom's canon wife. Personally, though, I think Cordelia having blue hair is more that originally they wanted her to be an even more obvious reference to Catria, and then decided, oh wait, we're making them way too similar. There's that, and there's another thing that I'm thinking of. That hair colour looks way too similar to Chrom to be a coincidence. My theory is that originally Cordelia was meant to be related to him, and that's why they're unable to get married in the final version. That's just a thought that I had, because seriously, that hair colour does look a lot, just way too similar to Chrom to be a coincidence.